The judge thought he could break a tombguard with words, but he didn't know the silent soldier had already faced war, law, and death, and Arlington was not the place to challenge him. The midday sun burned bright over Arlington National Cemetery, its light reflecting off the white marble stones like a silent chorus of history, but none commanded more reverence than the tomb of the unknown soldier, Lieutenant Evan Blackwood. His uniform pressed to perfection and his rifle gleaming under the heat, moved with unshakable precision. 21 measured steps, each click of his boots echoing across the hushed crowd, followed by the ritual pause, the flawless pivot, and the return stride, all repeated with the kind of discipline that had become second nature to him. The silence was not just formality. It was the essence of the duty, a silence that honored countless souls who had no names, no identities, yet whose sacrifices echoed louder than any speech. Families stood in awe, cameras lowered, children stilled as if sensing that this was not entertainment but something sacred. To them, the guard looked like a statue carved from stone, a man stripped of personality, bound only by rules and ritual. But behind the sharp jawline and unwavering gaze, Evan's mind was alive. Every step, every pause was not just a drill but a promise he had sworn when he first donned the badge of the old guard. His thoughts flickered briefly to his father, a veteran who had taught him that silence could carry more weight than 1,000 words, and to his fallen brothers from Afghanistan, men whose faces would forever march beside him in memory. The crowd saw only a soldier performing a ceremony, but to Evan, each step was personal, each pivot a prayer. The sound of the wind through the trees felt like whispers from the past, urging him never to falter, never to dishonor those who could no longer stand. He held his rifle at his shoulder with such discipline that even the trembling heat waves rising from the stone plaza could not shake his stance. The tomb behind him was more than stone and marble. It was a line between the living and the dead, guarded not just by men but by a legacy that demanded perfection. And so, under the blazing Virginia sun, Evan Blackwood walked his 21 steps, pivoted, paused, and walked again, knowing that while to the crowd it may have looked like ceremony, to him it was the heartbeat of duty, the purest form of honor, and a vow no storm, no threat, no man could ever break. The air was heavy with the hum of cicadas and the weight of silence that always wrapped itself around Arlington, when suddenly the quiet cracked. An elderly woman in the front row let out a strangled gasp, her knees buckling as she collapsed onto the hot pavement. A murmur surged through the crowd like wind rippling through tall grass. Children were pulled back, hands reached out. Someone shouted for a medic, but Lieutenant Evan Blackwood didn't move a muscle. His boots struck in perfect rhythm. Click, pause, pivot, his rifle balanced with mathematical precision on his shoulder. To break formation was unthinkable, the creed of the tomb guard older than the uniforms they wore. No distraction, no movement, no compromise, not for storms, not for hecklers, not even for death itself. Yet the tension climbed as tourists raised their phones, capturing the surreal contrast of a soldier marching in flawless silence while a woman fought for breath at his feet. That's when another voice cut through the panic, sharp and commanding, dripping with arrogance. A tall man in a tailored suit pushed his way forward, flashing a badge that caught the light. He introduced himself with a smirk as Judge Harold Whitman, his tone heavy with superiority, and barked at the tomb guard to stop immediately. "You're violating protocol," he snapped, pointing at Evan as if he were a disobedient child. "You are obstructing aid and could be charged with neglect of duty under federal law." The words slithered through the crowd, freezing many in confusion, and suddenly all eyes were no longer on the woman struggling on the ground but on the lone soldier who continued his 21 steps with perfect defiance. Gasps rose as Whitman shoved past two bystanders and strode up to the rope line, his finger stabbing the air. "Stand down, soldier, or I'll have you arrested this instant," he roared, his voice booming across the sacred plaza. But Evan didn't blink, didn't twitch, didn't so much as let his jaw shift. His eyes locked on the horizon, his body fused with the oath he had sworn. To the crowd, the scene was surreal. An immovable soldier, a desperate woman, and a furious judge whose words seemed to fall like stones into a lake that gave no ripple. And as the tension swelled, the people around knew they were witnessing a collision between ceremonial silence and raw authority. unaware that the guard they were staring at was far more than a statue in uniform. Judge Harold Whitman's polished shoes clicked against the pavement as he stormed past the rope barrier, ignoring the gasps and protests of the crowd. His face was red with indignation. His chest puffed out like a man used to being obeyed without question. He closed the distance to Lieutenant Evan Blackwood with long, aggressive strides, his voice dripping venom as he barked, "You're a disgrace to this uniform. This is dereliction of duty, and I will personally see you prosecuted." His words sliced through the tense air, each one louder than the last, drawing every eye and every camera toward the clash. Children clutched their parents' hands tighter, tourists froze mid-recording, and the frail woman who had collapsed moments earlier was now being tended to by two strangers, her cries overshadowed by the judge's fury. But Evan remained unshaken, his rifle still resting like an extension of his own spine, his eyes fixed beyond the horizon in unbreakable silence. That silence enraged Whitman even more, the lack of reaction gnawing at his pride until he snapped. He stepped forward, shoving his finger into Evan's chest, the sharp poke bouncing off the stiff fabric of the immaculate uniform. "Answer me, damn you!" he shouted, his spit flecking the air, his arrogance blazing under the sun. The crowd recoiled, some gasping audibly, others whispering frantically about whether this man had just crossed a sacred line. Yet Evan did not move. He did not even breathe differently, his pulse steady like a drum, his mind replaying training drills that had forged his composure in fire. Whitman, intoxicated by his own sense of power, mistook the silence for weakness. "Do you know who I am?" he thundered, his finger jabbing again, harder this time. "I am a federal judge. I can end your career in a single ruling. I can have you in chains before sundown." The words reverberated against the marble walls, but beneath the tailored suit and inflated authority, something fragile flickered in Whitman's voice, an insecurity masked by bluster. Still, Evan stood like granite, his measured 21 steps unbroken even by the storm raging inches from his chest. To the crowd, it was becoming more than a confrontation. It was a test of wills, a spectacle of arrogance against unshakable resolve. Phones zoomed closer, capturing every vein bulging in Whitman's forehead, every bead of sweat on Evan's stoic face. And though the crowd didn't know it yet, this was the exact moment where the tide of power was beginning to shift, because the judge was playing a game he didn't understand, against a man who had already survived battles far greater than this one. Evan took one deliberate step forward, his boots striking the stone like a verdict. "I know your laws, Judge. I studied them. Harvard trained me, combat tested me, and this uniform," he tapped the insignia over his heart, "binds me to something higher than politics or power. It binds me to honor." For the first time, Whitman stumbled back a half step, his confidence unraveling under the weight of words sharper than any bayonet. The crowd erupted into whispers, phones lifted higher to capture history in motion, and in that instant it was clear. The judge had picked a fight not with a silent guard, but with a soldier forged in both law and war, one who would not bend. Judge Whitman's face flushed crimson, his polished arrogance cracking under the weight of 1,000 silent stares. For the first time, the crowd was not on his side, not swayed by his title or his robe, but standing firmly behind the soldier he had tried to belittle. With a quick inhale, Whitman straightened his jacket and tried to summon his authority back into the air, his voice trembling but still sharp. "You forget your place, Lieutenant," he barked, forcing a sneer back onto his lips. "I could have you stripped of this uniform before sundown. A soldier who disobeys the law is nothing but a criminal with a badge." He stepped closer, jabbing his finger again, but the tremor in his hand betrayed him. Evan Blackwood did not move. His eyes, sharp as flint, burned with the memory of fallen comrades who had once believed in something greater than themselves. He allowed the silence to stretch just long enough for Whitman's threat to hang limp in the summer air. And then, with the calm precision of a man who had been trained to control chaos, Evan spoke again. "You speak of law, Judge, but you twist it like a weapon. You hide behind it because you've forgotten what it was meant to protect. The people, their dignity, their freedom." His voice dropped lower, more personal. a sound that carried across the marble like the echo of a bell. I fought so your children could wake up free. I carried brothers through gunfire so this country could breathe. And you? You disgraced their sacrifice with your pride. The crowd's whispers turned into a rising murmur, a wave of approval swelling against Whitman's crumbling facade. A woman in the audience, her face still pale from the earlier collapse, called out weakly, "He's right!" And suddenly others followed, voices breaking through fear to defend the guard. Whitman spun around, his authority unraveling in real time. But there was no rescue, no gavel, no courtroom here. Only truth and witnesses. Evan took another step forward, his boots striking stone with finality, his tone unshakable. Judge Whitman, I answer to something you cannot bend. Honor. Duty. Sacrifice. And here, in this place, your power means nothing. The judge's mouth opened, but no sound came. His smirk was gone, his hand limp at his side, as if stripped of every weapon he had ever carried. The crowd erupted into applause, not the kind of polite clapping that followed a ceremony, but a raw, thunderous affirmation of the soldier who had stood not just in silence, but in truth. Whitman turned pale, his authority shattered, while Evan returned to his post, his rifle snapping back into place. 21 steps. Pivot. Pause. The ritual continued, but now, everyone watching understood. This was not just ceremony. It was a vow, carried by a man who had faced war and returned unbroken. Humiliation is a poison that seeps deep, and Judge Whitman felt it coursing through his veins as the applause for Lieutenant Evan Blackwood thundered against his pride. His chest rose and fell rapidly, his carefully cultivated mask of superiority slipping further with every cheer. He would not be reduced to a laughingstock by a soldier. Clutching at his last scraps of power, he raised his voice above the noise, his tone sharp, desperate, venomous. Silence! He roared, his words cracking like a whip. This man has broken protocol in front of the sacred tomb of the unknown soldier. This is dereliction of duty. I demand his immediate arrest. Gasps rippled through the crowd, confusion lacing the air. But Whitman's eyes darted toward two nearby Capitol Police officers, hoping their badges would shield his crumbling authority. He pointed at Evan, his finger trembling with rage. Do your duty. Place this soldier in custody. The officers froze, caught in the tension, their hands hovering near their belts, uncertain of their orders. All eyes turned to Evan, who stood motionless, the rifle steady against his shoulder. His jaw clenched but his gaze unwavering. He didn't plead, didn't flinch, didn't defend himself with excuses. Instead, he spoke with calm steel. Judge Whitman, you know as well as I do that I've broken no law. This isn't about protocol. It's about your pride. His voice resonated like a hammer striking stone, firm and undeniable. The crowd murmured louder, their unease shifting to indignation, their loyalty swaying further from the judge's grasp. One of the Capitol officers stepped back, visibly uncomfortable, while the other lowered his hand entirely, refusing to act on Whitman's outburst. Panic flickered across the judge's eyes, his last thread of control snapping. Desperation made him reckless. He lunged forward, shoving his face close to Evan's, his spit flying with his words. You are nothing without that uniform. Do you hear me? Nothing. The insult echoed against the marble, but before it could settle, Evan leaned in just enough for only Whitman, and the closest of the crowd, to hear his reply. This uniform doesn't make me who I am. My honor does. Something you'll never understand. The words landed like a final verdict, heavier than any gavel. The crowd erupted again, louder, bolder, their voices washing over Whitman until he seemed smaller, swallowed by his own fury. He staggered back, sweat beading at his brow, realizing too late that he was no longer feared, no longer respected, and no longer in control. For the first time in his career, Judge Whitman looked powerless. Evan returned to his measured steps, 21 forward, pivot, pause, while the echoes of justice carried through Arlington like a living reminder of what could never be silenced. The crowd that had once been frozen in silence was now buzzing with whispers, their eyes darting between the unflinching tombguard and the visibly unraveling federal judge. Judge Whitman adjusted his tie with trembling fingers, his face blotched with rage and humiliation. But beneath the surface, another fear gnawed at him, fear of exposure. He had built his career on intimidation, bending rules, silencing opponents with legal jargon and veiled threats. But here, in the open air of Arlington, his carefully guarded facade was cracking. A young man in the audience, no older than 20, raised his phone high, live-streaming every second to an audience already swelling by the thousands online. "The world is watching," someone muttered, and the phrase rippled through the crowd like a warning bell. Whitman's voice faltered as he tried again to command the Capitol Police. But they stood rooted, unwilling to obey what sounded more like the desperate pleas of a cornered man than the orders of a judge. Evan's steady march continued, boots striking marble with unshaken rhythm, the embodiment of discipline and calm. And then, as if fate itself demanded truth, a man stepped from the back of the gathering, a sharp-suited figure with an unmistakable presence. "Judge Whitman," he called, his voice booming with authority. "This farce ends now." All heads turned as Special Prosecutor Daniel Reeves revealed himself, holding a leather briefcase thick with files. His eyes bored into Whitman with a cold fury. "I warned you. Your corruption case was already being prepared for federal review. And now you've humiliated yourself on live camera, abusing a soldier in sacred ground." Gasps tore through the crowd. Phones zoomed in, fingers flew across screens, comments exploding online. Whitman stammered, his bravado collapsing. You have no right." But Reeves snapped open the case, pulling out documents stamped with federal seals. "Bank records, witness testimonies, payoffs, all tied to you. This soldier you tried to disgrace? He won't face charges. You will." The crowd roared, their voices no longer whispers but thunder, cheering for justice as Whitman's knees seemed to buckle under the weight of his exposed sins. The once feared judge now stood pale and trembling, his eyes darting for an escape route that did not exist. Evan halted mid-step, his silence carrying more power than any outburst. His gaze steady as if reminding everyone that honor, when tested, always endures. Arlington had become more than a resting place for heroes. It was now the stage where a corrupt man's empire began to crumble before the eyes of the living.